Thanks for coming. Glad to see a few folks here from the community, a few students, so glad you're here. My name's Darcy Holder, I'm the programs director, and I'm thrilled to welcome you for this is the first in a series called Folk School Stories Celebrating 100 Years. Yeah, so it's a series of conversations, not every week, but a couple times a month. We'll invite some archivists, folklorists, historians, musicians, folk school friends, Brasstown regulars to share snapshots of folk school history. So each month has a different theme. This month's theme is our early history, and this is the very first in the whole series, so you'll be learning about Olive Dame and John Campbell. And we're going to be visited by two authors, historians, researchers, experts, David Liden and Rooney Floyd, and they're both going to share a bit about their own experiences and also about Olive and John. So I'm going to invite David up to kick us off. Thank you.
All right. We're going to go in chronological order here, so I'll start with John. For those of you who don't know me, I live about 3 miles down the road and have been here since the early 80s in some form or other, part of the folk school, and certainly enjoyed all of that. And I really appreciate the chance to get back and kind of renew my acquaintance with John C. Campbell. So the last few days I've done that. I've gone through some written material and some notes I've had, and reminded once again what a remarkable character he was. And I want to thank Darcy for the opportunity to spend this little bit of time doing that. What I'd like to do is say a little bit about John kind of as a historical figure, and then sort of get behind that remarkable person and hint a little bit at what kind of a person he really was. You know, what kind of personality was he? What did he believe? How did he do what he did, which was considerable. So let me start with this kind of historical timeline. He was born in Indiana. He was a Midwesterner and grew up in Wisconsin in a well-to-do Presbyterian household. His dad was an immigrant from Scotland, started as a machinist for the railroad and worked his way up to upper level management. So John grew up in comfortable circumstances and was sent by his family off to New England to get a proper education, and probably come back as an ordained Presbyterian minister and take over the big church in town. I'm not sure what the expectations were, but that's kind of common to a family situation like that. And he went off to New England, went to Phillips Academy, to Williams College, and Andover Theological Seminary, graduated about 1895 or so, but was never ordained, and joined up with the American Missionary Association, which was a Congregationalist denominated supported a missionary movement, and came with that organization into the Appalachian region, the Southern Highlands, as he soon called it. The interest in the Appalachian region at the turn of the century, which the denominations are all starting to demonstrate, was reinforced by the local color movement in literature and Teddy Roosevelt's country life movement. There was just a lot of attention to the region from a variety of perspectives. And for the denominations, it was a matter of bringing the church, the proper church, to an unchurched people. And there was all sorts of language that described, even language like heathen and backward and unchristian. And the denominations sort of had field day with their presumed description and understanding of what they were going to find in the region. So he came into the region as part of that momentum, a kind of a multi-institutional focus on the southern Appalachian region, and soon got uncomfortable with a lot of those associations. Started first of all with a school in Joppa, Alabama. He was this was his first assignment. He was the principal of this school. You can see John in the second row there, just a tiny bit to the left. This was his first assignment in the region. And he went on to Pleasant Hill, Tennessee after that. He talked about some of the difficulties and challenges in working with these young people. And they included things like pistol toting and moonshine. And also hope to get beyond being uncomfortable with manual labor and some racial prejudices. I mean, it was an interesting mix of values and attitudes that he found here. But he thoroughly enjoyed his time here, and he ended up talking the pistol-toting senior guys out of bringing their weapons to class. And he ended up getting to know some of the moonshiners and convinced them that probably it wasn't a good idea to be supplying the older guys in the school with moonshine, and they ended up agreeing with him. So he had to work through some of those sorts of things. But this is a wonderful example of a missionary-supported school, this one in Alabama, and then another in Pleasant Hill, Tennessee. He returned home for a short period of time and realized how homesick he was for the southern highlands, for the Appalachian Mountains. And he was so blue about having to go north again that his first wife, Grace Buckingham, I think her name was, even though she was not really well, she encouraged him to go back and find another school, take another appointment, and follow his love for the southern highlands. So he went at this point to Demarest, Georgia, and became the second president of Piedmont College. The pressures, the fundraising pressures on Piedmont College were so substantial that the Carnegie Foundation had made a grant that that was a challenge grant. They had to match that grant, and John was never really a well person. And he had what you might call a breakdown at this point after a couple of years at Piedmont College. The pressure of fundraising in particular really got to him. And medical advice and family advice was to leave town, go take a trip, and in fact he did, went back to Scotland, visited family there, and met Olive Dame on board ship on the way back to Scotland. They married on their return, and she encouraged him to look for another appointment, and in fact they moved from there to Demarest, Georgia, and Piedmont College. During his travels, he read about the Russell Sage Foundation, and the Russell Sage Foundation was a brand new foundation established by Olivia Slocum Sage, the second wife of Russell Sage, who was a railroad baron, and at one point apparently the most wealthy person in the United States. He left his wife all of his estate, some $70 million. $10 million of that she used to start the Russell Sage Foundation. And she decided that the mission and purpose of the foundation should be to support the living conditions of working people. And that's kind of ironic, because Russell Sage, the robber baron, the railroad baron, never apparently had any interest in the living conditions of working people. So where, in fact, did this come from? And according to Wikipedia, which I believe word for word, Russell Sage was not the most was not known for a maritable fidelity. And I think this was her chance to get back at old Russ by taking $10 million of her inheritance and starting the Russell Sage Foundation. It's still there today, and it's supported very progressive programs and publications over the years. Women's rights, women's suffrage, labor justice, immigrant well-being, healthcare, urban planning, various kinds of social work. And John was struck immediately by the possibility that this foundation would be interested in supporting a systematic survey of the Appalachian region and getting the story right once and for all. I'm going to sort of jump ahead a little bit. A colleague introduced his name to John Glenn, who is executive director of Russell Sage Foundation. John Glenn wanted to meet John Campbell. They had a conversation. John Glenn invited John C. Campbell to submit an application. And as a former grant writer, I'm just thoroughly impressed with the argument that John C. Campbell made to the Russell Sage Foundation. It's the application is in here. It's about a 3-page letter, and it's really brilliant. He begins by saying that my time in my last 10 years in the Southern Highlands has taught me of the splendid possibilities dormant in the American Highlander. So he sets out the possibility early in his grant language. And then he critiques what's being done so far. It is disorganized, it's uncoordinated, it's full of biases and stereotypes. The denominations are competing with each other rather than serving the needs of the people in the region. They're not understanding what those needs are. They're creating schools and sending their representatives down to make sure that the curriculum is okay and the behavior of the kids and the teachers is okay. The denominations, on the other hand, are using these Appalachian stereotypes to do their own fundraising. And they're painting this picture of heathen and backward Appalachian folks who need the denomination's help. So it's masterful in terms of establishing its hope, and then in very delicate language, critiquing what's really going on, and then promising, after a systematic survey and understanding of the region, to come in and do it right. But I can only do it with the support of this independent charitable foundation. He concludes by saying, what we need is a sympathy deep enough to view the mountaineer as a man necessary to us, and not simply as a picturesque type for journalistic exploitation. So he doesn't go back to a Piedmont College with us. We show Piedmont College front steps. It's Olive and John on the front steps in Demarest, Georgia. He doesn't go back to Piedmont College because the Russell Sage Foundation says, we want to support you. And agreed to hire him at $2,500 a year and cover all of their traveling expenses for both Olive and John. So they begin their crusade, really, across 8 states to survey this region and make a case for what the region really needs. John went on to, if you push the next one, he went on to start the Southern Highlands Division of the Russell Sage Foundation with an office in Asheville. He went on to create the Conference of Southern Mountain Workers, which existed. Mrs. Campbell ended up taking over the leadership of that organization. It existed right up to the 1970s. It was part of a momentum, a focus on education. Jane Addams in Hull House in Chicago is advocating urban settlement schools. Others in the region are advocating settlement schools. Booker T. Washington is advocating teaching educational institutions for black folks. P.P. Claxton, Secretary of Education in Tennessee, is advocating folk schools, the application of the Danish folk school model to the Appalachian region. So these folks are getting together in conferences and sharing all of this information about educational opportunities that could be possible if it was addressed and approached in a coordinated and well-funded way, independent of government agencies. He said the government agencies, they come in on the train, interview a couple of people at the railroad station, and take off again. He said it's kind of typical. The denominations doing the same thing. They're not penetrating into the region where the real issues are and where the real understanding is necessary. So all these folks are coming together, and there's this kind of boiling pot of wonderful ideas, and John is just central to all of that. I'm hurrying here. The next slide. He's imagining folk schools, and he's thinking to himself. Part of the problem is World War I had begun, and travel was almost impossible at that point to Europe. But he's thinking, and he says to himself, we can have folk schools, we can have rural, democratic, egalitarian, non-competitive schools for young adults without having to go to Denmark. Others are joining him. Claxton in particular is joining him. The next slide is John getting on a trolley in Asheville. But he died in 1919, and the story I've been told, that my lifemate can't remember, is that he died running for a train in New York City, the train station. He had angina, which got increasingly worse through all of this. Mrs. Campbell talks about John trying to get over the mountain to the Pine Mountain Settlement School in Kentucky, and he can't breathe and he can't walk, and they have to carry him. He's getting sicker and sicker all the time, but he doesn't stop. He doesn't stop. So this is not New York City. It's not the train station in New York City, but it reminded me of the story that I heard that he died at the age of 51. One more slide. I want to just read some quotes. What kind of guy was he really? I mean, we can talk about what he did. We can talk about what he accomplished. But he was encouraged to after Pleasant Hill, he did go home for a short period of time, and he was just heartsick the whole time. My heart is not in this work in northern schools. He never lost his intention of going south again where his heart took him. That's what his brother Gavin is saying about John. John is saying, since 4 happy years at the school in Joplin and Pleasant Hill, I've been somewhat a wanderer up here, up north. But we're finally going south again in a few days, and we look for a position in dear old Dixie. A colleague says, John is the finest and the best equipped person I've ever worked with. I have not met his superior. He's always happy, good-natured, and had a well-developed sense of humor. He's sincere, unselfish, gentle, friendly, patient, considerate. Olive received a letter from a former student of John's upon hearing of his death in 1919. And he writes Olive, you cannot know what Mr. Campbell meant to me. When I was discouraged, he took time to cheer me. When I was out of money, he gave it to me. He taught me many things an awkward country boy needed to know. After years, that's Phil was saying, after years as an army chaplain and a minister, I should rather have some boys say of me, what I can say of Mr. Campbell. Though he is gone, his life still remains in us. During his travel during the survey, he traveled with Olive. Is traveling by horseback. They have an outfitted wagon. They're walking, whatever it takes to spend 2 years on the road across 8 states doing this survey. Olive observes one morning, his great love of the people whom he felt in a particular sense to be his own, his thorough understanding of them, and his simple and spontaneous friendliness won him a welcome everywhere. Many times I've seen him before the hearth fire in some little cabin, as much at home as in the most polished assembly, and far more happy. He never left a home without feeling that the parting was one between old friends, a feeling which was shared by his hosts. And one last comment, and then I'll stop. But in 1927, in September, this room was dedicated, the community room. That's Keith's house over there. This is the community room. And when staff sort of roll it all together and say, let's get down to Keith's house, and they mean the community room, it really bothers me because it shows a lack of understanding of the distinction between the room that the community built 2 years before Mrs. Campbell got the grant from the Keith Fund to build the Keith House.
So this one came first.
This came first, 1927. The dedication was in here. You're sitting on folding chairs today, but the chairs were handmade chairs. The community is here. And Colonel Jack Dillard, who was the attorney in Murphy, who did the incorporation papers and all that, is addressing the crowd here. He's addressing you. We're dedicating the community room. And Jack Dillard is talking about how appropriate it is to name it after the school, after John C. Campbell. Many years ago, there came into the mountains of our Southland a young man with the spirit of a crusader, with a heart that's literally overflowed with love for his kind and fired with a lively zeal for unselfish service to his master and his fellow man. For more than a quarter of a century, this man lived among our mountain people, laboring always to do what he could to better their conditions, along with both material and spiritual lines. A fine judge of human nature, he soon came to know the mountaineer as few others had known him. Oh, there's just so much to say. But poor Rooney's chomping at the bit here because he needs to talk about Olive. So I'm just going to get out of the way, then maybe we can have some questions and some discussion.
Thank you.
David, that was very good. I wish now I had gone first. But it is what it is. So let's see if we can get to know a little bit about Olive's personality. Born 1882 into a New England family of Mayflower descent. Her father was a school principal, and her mother was a gifted English, music, and art teacher. She enjoyed active and rich youth and developed an inquiring mind and determined will. These were attributes that would serve her well in the coming years. Having graduated from Tufts College in 1903, she taught literature for several years. Then in 1906, she planned a summer voyage to the British Isles. On this voyage, as you know, she met John Campbell going to Scotland to visit his ancestral homeland and to recuperate from the loss of his wife and infant son. Olive felt that she was called to serve humanity through education, and in this way, she and John were a lot alike. By their trip's end, they were practically engaged. All right. In 1907, they married at her home in Medford, Mass, and returned down to Piedmont College in Georgia. As John's health had finally improved a little bit. The Campbells were, some of this is a little bit repetitious from David's, but I hope that'll just add emphasis. The Campbells were among some of the first to appreciate the diverse and character and skills of Appalachian people. As a result, they disagreed with the prevalent stereotype of mountain people held by most people in educational administration. Since there was no credible information available on Appalachian social conditions, the Campbells obtained a grant from Russell Sage and began a 3-year journey in 1908 by covered wagon to determine the realistic conditions and the actual needs in Appalachia. Olive kept a detailed journal of this entire survey, as well as collected English ballads still preserved by word of mouth in mountains. The craft skills and homesteading skills developed by the people were found to be very impressive, but the lack of adult education was the greatest need identified in the survey. John had read about the Danish Folk School for adults and how they had produced productive, contented rural families for over 60 years. He believed the folk school model could be adapted in Appalachia. Upon completing the mountain survey, the Campbells planned a year-long study of the Danish folk schools. After the tickets were purchased for Denmark, the outbreak of World War I canceled the trip, and the Campbells moved to Asheville, where John headed a field office for the Russell Sage Foundation. In Asheville, they worked on the survey, the final report, but if we get the next slide. Yeah. But unfortunately, Olive and John lost 2 infant daughters. The first to a weak heart, condition probably inherited from John, and the second to pneumonia. They dealt with these losses by heavily involving themselves in their work. Olive completed her ballad work and consulted with Cecil Sharp, the English Ballad Authority, and published English folk songs from Southern Appalachia by Olive Dane Campbell and Cecil J. Sharp in 1917. This was the first of 4 books that she would write over the years, each of high acclaim. As you already know, in 1919, John died suddenly at the age of 51. After 12 years of marriage, Olive was left alone to carry out their dream. If we could get the next slide. She began by taking all their notes to a small cottage on Nantucket Island that she and John had built. There, she methodically compiled everything from the survey, and published The Southern Highlander and His Homeland in 1921 by John C. Campbell. This was the second of her 4 published books. When the war ended, her family had been dissolved. It was time to pursue the Danish Folk School study. She obtained a fellowship from the American Scandinavian Foundation for the study of adult education and left for Denmark in 1922. She took with her a young fellow mountain worker, Marguerite Butler, who would later become her assistant in founding the new school. At the age of 40, Olive was at the peak of her health, strength, and mental ability. After touring Scandinavia for 18 months and visiting about 120 folk schools, the 2 ladies returned with enough of an intellectual grasp and enthusiasm to implement the Danish folk school model in Appalachia. For the next 2 years, Olive continued to work with the Conference of Southern Mountain Workers, that David mentioned, while she and Marguerite searched for a site for the new school. In 1925, how long ago was that? In 1925, Olive had chosen Brasstown, North Carolina as a site because the people very much wanted this school and pledged and needed support. By year's end, the John C. Campbell Folk School, named for her husband, was incorporated, and that's of course what we're celebrating. During the early years of directing the school, Olive also continued her study of the Danish folk schools. In 1928, she published her third book, The Danish Folk School, by the Dame Campbell. It has been called the most understanding book on that subject ever written. Over the next 2 decades, she directed the school effectively through the Depression and World War II to become an asset in the community and the region. All right, then next, in 1946, I was born, but that didn't really matter. Olive retired after 21 years as director of the school and returned home to Medford, where she carried on a robust correspondence and put together her husband's biography as a labor of love. The life and work of John Charles Campbell was her 4th and final book before she peacefully went home to be with the Lord in 1954. Okay, back to the close. Olive Dane Campbell was a gifted lady of boundless mental and physical energy. Believing in the value and uniqueness of the individual, she had come to the mountains with a listening ear. Her guidance was that the form the school takes is always to be based on a need. Her stated purpose for the school to awaken, enliven, and enlighten the community with lifelong learning explains the school motto, I sing behind the plow. I wish I could tell you more, but that's it. Thank you.
A little bit about the Danish folk school model.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, there you go.
It's format mainly just for adults, it's not for children. And here in Appalachia, there were schools for the youngest children. They were not that good, but they had schools. But there was nothing for adults. And they were, by modern standards, just considered illiterate. And there was a real need for them to know more about the world they lived in order to enjoy staying at home on the farm, being productive and happy. And that was the same thing that happened in Denmark. And that was the same thing that a pastor over there, the reason he had founded the schools, to keep the rural families contented and productive on the farms. And they were some of the best dairymen in the world during that period of time. And so the Campbells wisely believed that that could be implemented here instead of having kids toting pistols to school. Such as that.
So is it more for what they needed to run the farms and that kind of thing?
Just to enjoy life. To get away from work, go there for a short period of time, fellowship, have fun together, and a healing spirit, and go back to work after that. Sort of like it is today.
Mm-hmm.
How large a community was Brasstown when the school was established?
Back then, it was only a little place. Jan Davidson said that, and I stole that from him. It was a population of 47. And he says, today we're a robust metro center of 47. Population never changed. So it was tiny. It was just about the size it is today.
To give you an idea, though, of kind of the extent of the interest in starting the school here, Marguerite Butler was encouraged by Fred O. Scroggs, the local businessman, to come and visit with the community at Brasstown Baptist Church. It's not there anymore, but over 200 people, they say, showed up to that meeting to hear Marguerite talk about what a folk school might be, and their interest in the possibility of bringing one here to Brasstown if the community was ready and interested in supporting that. And they responded very positively. So even though the immediate population might have been pretty small at the time, the word got out across a pretty considerable piece of geography. I mean, large enough to bring that many people on roads that were, you know, really unimaginable to us at this point. But people who walked, rode horses, wagons, whatever it took to get to that meeting. So there was considerable interest amongst a number of people.
There's some things in that case right there, I suppose. Suzanne will probably put those in there. Actually, there's two actual pledge cards, the real card, signed by the people, and then there were probably maybe as many as 100 of those things. And this was all the support. They were pledging building materials, days of labor, some money, not much. But that was the kind of thing that showed how much they wanted the school here.
So Olive could have honorably named the school after herself, since it was primarily
Sure.
her
Sure.
thrust as well as Marguerite's. Considering the times, are we to infer that it might not have been as accepted if to have a school named after a woman at the time?
You know, there's some of that, I suppose, but if you read and know more about Olive and the things that are in that book that David has, she was so devoted to her husband that I believe that that's why she named it after him. She never found another love life after he passed away at age 41, and because he was about 15 years older than her. So he was 51, yeah, and she was probably about 35. I asked a lady that used to live here, Wilson, what was Danny Wilson's mother? Ellie Wilson. She knew Mrs. Campbell and actually lived with her for a few months at a time in the farmhouse. I asked her did Miss Campbell ever have other men in her life after she'd lost her husband? And she said, oh, no. She didn't have time for that. She said, we were her family. She had everything, was devoted to the school and the students, and that she felt like she was still married to John. You know, so I believe it was truly out of honoring her husband.
He introduced her to this world, and I think you know, there was just a profound indebtedness to John for that. He offered a lot of context and interpretation for her as to what she was seeing and what was going on here, and I think it's entirely appropriate that she respect him in this way, in the same way she did with the printed material that she really attributed to him. In fact, she put in a phenomenal amount of work to edit and hey.
Hey, I just wanted to say Ellie Wilson's book, My Journey to Appalachia, which I hope we still have that in the craft shop. That's an amazing story about Olive's time here at the folk school. She was only here for 20 years, just a little over 20 years. So Ellie came down from Baltimore and lived in the farmhouse with Olive Campbell. So if you want a good story about the early days of the folk school, read that book. It's wonderful.
And lots of us here are privileged to know Ellie for a number of years. She only passed away, 4 or 5 years ago?
It's been longer than that, but she lived in her 90s. And she wrote another book, which was also about Hayesville, where she was a social worker for many years, and it talks a lot about the TVA projects and how the lake, buried communities that needed to be relocated and stuff like that. So submerged, I guess is the right word for it.
If you read Ellie's wonderful book, it's clear that this school essentially started as a farm school, and we we fixed Wikipedia, which used to say that the school was started for the perpetuation of traditional Appalachian crafts. We fixed that. And what I like to do for the morning songs that I do on Monday, History of the Folk School morning songs, is just list the classes that were being taught, that Ellie mentions being taught during her time here. And it's so clear that it's very, very practical rural skills and farming skills.
What would be some examples?
Pardon?
What would be some examples of those classes?
How to improve your livestock, how to use lime and fertilizer on your fields, how to run a sawmill,
Surveying, terracing the fields for drainage.
how to market your agricultural produce. And in fact, this community started co-ops for production and marketing both. But they're very, very practical kinds of classes, and it kind of makes you feel like, wow, I would really enjoy a school like that at the time. Yeah.
I think too, this was all happening at the same time. There was a lot of, I'm a social worker by trade. There was a lot of movement towards social enlightenment. People were getting more aware of the differences in cultures and that sort of thing, because the whole social work movement was happening at the same time, and I can see a nice connection there from him coming and saying, no, these are not lesser than, these are equal people, and we'll learn from them as much as we give them. That was all coming at the same time.
The Russell Sage Foundation really mirrored that spirit, and Mrs. John Glenn, I can't remember her first name, was a social worker and was part of that movement, and that ethic really pervaded the work of the Russell Sage Foundation. So when John offered his proposal, in fact,
it made sense.
Yeah, it made perfect sense to the foundation and to Mrs. And Mrs. Campbell and Mrs. Glenn were corresponding themselves about exactly this sort of thing. So when John submitted his application, John Glenn already, I'm sure, had been convinced by his wife that you better fund those folks
Since he agrees with skills.
because they're right up our alley, or my alley. But that's exactly right. It was
It's
very
all
much a
happening at
part
the
of
same
that
time.
whole spirit. Yeah.
Thank you for putting up with us. We enjoyed it.
No, thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
We are so lucky that we have folks in our community that have already done this kind of research and have this kind of knowledge, and I could just reach out and say, hey, you want to talk about Olive and John, and they can do that. So give it up for Rooney, Floyd. And as I said, this is the first of many. We will be doing these presentations through September of next year. So if you come to every single one, you'll be an expert by the end. October is early history, so the next presentation is October 22nd. So next Wednesday, we'll have Clay Logan here, who is a community staple. If y'all know him, he's county commissioner, I believe, and has a long history here, and is going to talk about the Brasstown community and the folk school, and some of those founding stories, and also probably share some of his own stories. So